Good morning. Good morning. Okay, we'll get started here. I think I got everything set up properly. Welcome. This is the last week. The end is finally so near. I'm sure many of you are very ready for the semester to be over, for a very late spring break to finally start. So looking through this, I feel like we probably should be able to cover this material, the end of this chapter today, and hopefully Wednesday we'll be able to just spend focusing on questions, review stuff, and maybe Friday take off, or maybe I'll just chime in just in case, but we will see. Okay, any questions? Let me see if I've got anything coming up on my chat. So the end of chapter 26, the last bit of stuff, we've got a handful of organisms still to think about. There's some viral causes of central nervous system infection. There are some parasites, some protists, and some helminths. And also, along with the viruses, you can't forget about stuff like prions. So the acellular things, I'd like to say organisms, but they're not. The acellular infectious agents, virus, and prions, and there's various types of those as we'll hit a little bit. So starting off, we want to think about some viral causes of encephalitis, and there are a number of different types of things that fit into this umbrella category of what we call arboviruses. And that really just means an arthropod-borne virus, or something, the vector that would transmit it maybe might be better to describe it as. And with that said, I'm almost certain that they are always, when we think about these arboviruses, are always transmitted by mosquitoes. So that's something to keep in mind as well. There are numerous things. West Nile virus, although that's not what we're looking at right here, is a type of arbovirus, and it's definitely something that we have on the radar here in Idaho. It's a type of infection that's been around for a while, maybe pushing almost 2 decades, maybe a little bit longer than that, really, that we've been seeing and dealing with this type of virus. And for us, whether it be Idaho or just the United States in general, that type of infection is relatively new, or an emerging type of pathogen. But it's not something that's new on the planet. It's plagued areas like certain areas in Egypt, the Nile Delta, has experienced West Nile for a very long time, right? So it kind of just depends on the circumstances. And there are definitely some other concerns or considerations when we think about some of these things, as we see here with equine encephalitis. So the potential for zoonoses or zoonotic diseases, something that we typically might think of or classify as being targeting animals, livestock, or other things, and not maybe necessarily us as a main host. So there are a handful of these encephalitis that have equine within the name. So horses more so. But when they plague us, there are definitely some serious consequences. And it's in a lot of these little kids are more it's more of a severe situation in these circumstances. So over in the first figure, all in red here are, and it's just been colored to make it show up, but these are salivary glands from a mosquito, and it's full of virus. And these viral particles would be inoculated into us as that mosquito takes a blood meal. And there's all sorts of other possibilities that mosquitoes might be bringing to you as well. This next one is a type of virus that's maybe more recent on the radar. Zika virus, also transmitted by mosquitoes. And with that said, there are numerous species of mosquitoes, all right? So it's not like one mosquito has the potential to carry all of these crazy viruses and maybe some malaria and other stuff as well, all right? There are potentials where you could see some mosquitoes that might harbor a couple of different things, but you don't just expect any type of mosquito to have the capabilities of transmitting everything that we're describing here. There is definitely some species specificity. So here, the Zika virus through an electron micrograph, and then we can see the impacts. And a lot of the issues truly were with, or are with, it's not a thing of the past, with developing children. So adults becoming infected with this may exhibit slight symptoms with this, but really nothing that is, that adverse. It's the developing child that's the bigger concern. And this is something, it was really, kind of on the radar quite a bit. And then, pandemic stuff makes other things kind of just go away. But there's definitely issues with mosquito transmission and the potential, if you are cooking up a little bun in the oven, that this developing child gets severely impacted. And you can see one of the issues neurologically is microcephaly, where you get shrunken head as a result of this. All right. We started this chapter with an image of a dog that they claimed was a rabid dog. Here's an image of the actual rabies virus. They're kind of bullet shaped, as you see a handful of these as I'm trying to move my pointer around them. And we call them rhabdoviruses for this bullet shape that we see here. So we'll hit some details of each of these as we move over into the table here in just a second as we get through some of these images. This next couple of images here are poliovirus, and there are a couple of, well, there's multiple issues with this. I'm pretty positive we mentioned this as we were talking other chapter stuff as we think about GI issues where it's a oral transmission that sets the stage for this. So there are it's been mentioned before, but here we want to think about some of the issues with it. The iron lung, which we showed before, as we think about neurological impairment. So not just respiratory issues, but the nervous destruction that sets the stage for this problem in the first place. And then also with the motor neuron function, the possibility of paralysis or other issues, but paralysis was definitely a big concern with polio. So this is something that is that we vaccinate against. Here's some of the virons right here. So the polio virus, whole bunches of them right here. There's two individuals almost back to back, almost simultaneously developing these vaccines. So it's a little bit apart, but pretty close time frame wise. So Sabin and Salk both developing different types of poliovirus vaccines that highly effective, both of them. There are a few issues. There's a couple of different strains of polio. Both of these vaccines are effective against all of that. So there is promise with both. The issues. Sabin's vaccine was created as an attenuated form of the virus. So when you attenuate something, virus or bacteria or whatever, you repeatedly are cultivating these things, trying to weaken or dilute, trying to cause this, whatever it is, to lose a lot of the properties that, the virulence properties that really establish infection or illness, right? So it's still there, it's still alive, it's just not as likely to cause disease, right? So the issue with those attenuated vaccines are there are potentials that mutation can occur, and then the person that was vaccinated might possibly be shedding this virus, which in turn is infective because of the mutation, right? Maybe sometimes we, thinking genetics type of stuff, sometimes we call that a back mutation, where you've lost something and then mutation causes it to, revert back to that maybe kind of wild type, if you will, all right? So there have been evidence of the Sabin vaccine, this attenuated form, causing illness, causing infection. And so, although it is still utilized in the United States, I believe that the chapter mentions since 2000, it's only the Salk vaccine that's registered for use due to some potential issues with this. And they were relatively slight, right? But still, you don't want to end up over here, right? So the Salk vaccine is what we call an inactivated. Back in the day, we really called a lot of these things killed vaccines. And so you'd think, oh, it's a killed virus. But from all definitions, we don't define a virus as being alive in the first place. So how do you kill it? Because it's not alive, right? So instead of saying it's a killed strain or whatever, we say it's inactivated. It does not have the capacity to cause disease. So the thoughts of mutation and making it virulent are not an option. So Salk vaccine is the one that, at least in the United States, is now the standard for that. So there are a couple of other, as we move into the chapter here in a second and show the table, a couple of other viruses, again, stuff like West Nile that I kind of mentioned in passing that we will touch on. But shifting over still acellular stuff, we want to look at this and think the littlest bit about prions. There are all sorts of potentials with this. There are numerous types of animals where we think about different names, but really it's kind of the same sort of an idea. And these things can be problems that we think about within that population of animal, or possibly something that could be a problem that's transmitted to us. And it would be typically thinking about consumption of infected tissues, like neural tissue eating brain, sets the stage for problems, right? And really, for me, just thinking about all of these different possibilities, all of these different potentials, really makes me think brain shouldn't be on the menu in the first place. Probably. You're just safer that way, all right? So there are handfuls of issues with this for these crazy, the red guys are the bad guys, the green guys are the normal, regularly folded proteins, right? And this is what's really kind of weird with the prions is that they are proteins. It's not nucleic acid. It's not capable of replicating like we think of cells replicating. But stuff still replicates. It's a spontaneous sort of conversion, or maybe a conversion not necessarily spontaneous, but a conversion of those normal proteins into these misshapen or misfolded, these activated, I guess you might say, forms of these proteins that once they get changed or converted, it's kind of like a chain reaction. And every other normal protein they're coming in contact with, they generate their conversion as well. So it's a reaction that starts to occur that you've got no way of controlling or stopping. And that's an issue as well. So there's a handful of different possibilities. It might be a spontaneous sort of generation of this altered form of protein, so a mutation as these proteins are being translated. Something doesn't happen properly in this conversion, and so they're mutated, if you will, all right, spontaneously happening. There are other potentials, as I just described. Once this guy happens, it can convert those normals into mutants. And then there's also the inoculation. So the consumption of this type of neural protein that's been altered causes that to alter your own normal proteins. So a handful of different possibilities, right? It can happen just by a mutation. It can happen by the consumption. And once it gets in there, the middle stuff is happening where those mutated proteins convert the normals, all right? So this causes all sorts of issues, but we basically describe them as spongiform encephalopathies. So it kind of makes the central nervous system turn into kind of like a sponge cake is what I think of, sort of, or like a bunch of Swiss cheese with all of these lesions or holes within the nervous tissue as a result of these proteins all kind of going crazy, which is disturbing in the first place. I think I mentioned to you guys the mad squirrel that I read about a while ago. There was, if I didn't, I'm going to say it real quick as I'm loading up this table. I believe it was last summer. There was some individual that apparently had a taste for squirrel brains. He was hunting or trapping squirrels, and apparently the brains were delicious. He was eating them, and jokingly, I thought, well, they probably taste nutty. I don't know. Not very much brain in the little dome of a squirrel, so I don't know. Not much of a meal there. But through the consumption of this, he developed what I also like to call mad squirrel. And he died from doing that. So, like I said a minute ago, really, I would say consumption of brain probably should not be something that you're hoping to do. All right. First off, let's talk about the those arboviruses. And as I said, there's a whole long list that have equines in their name. There's Eastern and Western St. Louis, which is also an equine, West Nile, Japanese, all of these arboviruses, mosquito-borne, and again, different types or species of mosquitoes hold the potential to transmit some of this. So the symptoms of these are definitely varied. It's also potentials with immune status or age of the individual, where little kids might be more susceptible and suffer more of an acute infection with these guys. So some fever and chills and headaches. There can be restlessness. If we think of the severe forms, this is where we progress to encephalitis, as a handful of the names are implying in the first place. So convulsions, coma, and death with some of the most severe forms are definitely possibilities. So we could see birds serving as reservoirs for a good amount of these. Horses also might, as we see some of this equine. But the bird as a reservoir, which is able to transmit to humans and to horses, as we see these other equines. And then, I already said this, there's a handful of different mosquitoes. So we think about looking for antibody within the serum, and also cerebral spinal fluid to detect virus and potential antibody within that as well. So there is vaccine for the Japanese encephalitis, but nothing for these others. I believe with that said, we're talking people. For horses, I think there are some vaccine potentials with these guys, but it's not something, so you can vaccinate your horse, but we're not capable of getting us with that. But maybe that's protecting us as well, because your horse isn't at risk. So with the prions, with this mad cow type of stuff, again, there are numerous types. Chronic wasting, scraping, mad cow, kuru is another that's human type of stuff. Creutzfeldt-Jakob is also human spongiform encephalopathy. So these TSEs are transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. That's what the T means. And there's all sorts of issues. Lots of the time, this, and maybe it also might depend on some of the circumstances. Inoculation might make it a little more rapid to progress. We definitely saw some evidence of this in England in the early 1990s with some outbreak of mad cow and people contracting and exhibiting symptoms pretty quickly, right? A lot of the time, exposure to these proteins or a spontaneous mutation causes the tissues to get altered very slowly. So it may take decades of kind of incubation within the host, if you will, before you really start seeing symptoms show up. And at that point, I mean, there's nothing you can do in the first place, but at that point, you know, there's serious things that are manifesting, and the prognosis at once we start seeing this is not very good, and or very long until your demise, right? So there's memory loss and confusion, blurred vision, you become pretty uncoordinated, insomnia, finally coma and death. So numerous potentials with that. So we can see this. I mentioned kuru a second ago, and issues with this were with the 4A tribe in Papua New Guinea, where they, as part of the death rites, would consume their fallen loved ones. And they thought by doing that, their spirits would live on within all that consumed them. So the issues came about as, nervous tissue is being consumed. And as I said, it typically takes quite a bit of time for it to manifest. The story goes that a lot of the youth, they were the ones consuming the nervous tissue, maybe not the best cuts, if you will. So that's what they got, right? Which unfortunately inoculates them. They get infected at an early age to in turn progress for a few decades to die of this crazy, all sorts of crazy issues that we don't recognize as the result of eating brains when you're a little kid. And here we go, all right? Through recognizing these issues and through counseling and talking with this tribe, they stopped consuming the dead. And in turn, issues have declined considerably. There are obviously still people that were harboring the infection, but not so much of a problem anymore. All right, that's crazy stuff. Yeah. I think that is probably the chronic wasting. Yes, I think saliva spread is a possibility with that. And there are, with the chronic wasting, let me flip to this back to, oh wait, where am I at? I'm still on this. Yeah, so we've got chronic wasting up here with deer and elk. Is it telling me anywhere? I know there are other issues with some bacteria that may fit in that same sort of category, and I'm questioning if it's the bacteria that's what's being spread. That's what is that organ? I can't, right off the top of my, there's so many bacteria. You're like, I know, I'm trying to make note cards. So yes. But I think with the most part, for the most part with this, it's still neural tissue. I'm not exactly sure with that. That's I will dig a little deeper with that and let you know. Yeah, because as far as these guys go, I don't think contact with saliva is a possibility, but with some of the bacterial organisms that cause like spontaneous abortion and other issues. Brucella is the one. I knew it had come to me. That I think is one that we see with saliva. Okay, polio. Poliomyelitis, you could see some cases that are asymptomatic. We obviously showed the more severe stuff. So it could be mild, a little bit of nausea and fever, and you see some headache. But then the other issues with the neurological impacts, there's paralysis, potential fatal respiratory paralysis, and hence the need to basically survive in that iron lung. There are some advances with some of that stuff where it's now not the same iron lung. There are a few that are still using that, but not so much. So polio is a fecal oral transmission. It's also droplet or aerosol transmission. So coughing and sneezing can spread that as well. Just kind of depends on the circumstances. So, and we went over this vaccine stuff here. And again, we say it, and I said we're trying to say inactivated, but oftentimes killed is still used kind of interchangeably. All right, rabies. This is definitely something that should be kind of a concerning virus because you don't really know. You want to be very cautious. I when I was teaching a microbiology lab a handful of years back, and a squirrel bit one of my students on the finger. She reached down to give it a little piece of her sandwich. The squirrels on the quad are, they're almost tamed. They want to come right up to you because they know you'll feed them. So the squirrel took a little taste of the sandwich and a taste of her finger, bit her on the fingertip, made it, and it made her bleed. That's kind of an issue. So she went to student help, and they proceeded to give her a round of rabies shots, which didn't sound so good. And after, I believe it's all right into the stomach as they're pushing in the last shot, the person in the clinic's like, squirrels don't usually harbor rabies. And I would think, geez, did I need all these shots? But maybe better safe than sorry. And, it's the student help, and it's an ISU student that got bit by a squirrel on ISU campus. I think they want to give her some rabies shots just to be safe, right? So keep that in mind. And if a little wild animal decides it wants to bite you, you ought to be concerned, even if it's not a wild animal. A dog or a cat has the potential to do that just as well, which is why we truly want to ensure that our pets are vaccinated properly. So issues with rabies, there's fever and headache, hyperactivity, hydrophobia, that frothing of the mouth that I described as we started this chapter, the salivation, there's terrors and confusion, paralysis, coma, and if it's not treated very quickly, you pretty much are gonna die, all right? So the bite of some infected animal sets the stage for transmission of this. So we can detect with antigen detection in tissues or antibodies to the specific virus as well. And there are as far as treatment goes, attenuated vaccine and rabies immunoglobulin, so passive transfusion of immunoglobulins to target the potential viruses it's getting in. As far as meningitis, viral meningitis, we've got handfuls of viruses that can fit into the viral meningitis category. Both herpes simplexes have the potential for that. Chickenpox, the varicella zoster, mumps, influenza, and measles, all possibilities for meningitis. So stiff neck, and we've talked bacterial meningitis as we see some of these same symptoms. Deep down, if you are exhibiting symptoms of meningitis, I think your true hope is probably that it fits somewhere in this viral realm. So usually something that is pretty mild, self-limiting sort of, about 2 weeks, and you see it resolving. So definitely something that's a little easier than the Neisseria meningitidis that can wipe you out. Zika we already looked at, and some of the symptoms with this, again, more so with the developing child, but you can see fever and rash. There's possibility of conjunctivitis, and then the obviously issues that we just described with that. So Aedes is one type, one genera of mosquito that that transmits this. The Anopheles mosquito is the one that transmits malaria. So not, like I said, not always capable of transmitting every single thing that we've mentioned. So handfuls of potentials for detection, and then treatment and vaccine, nothing. Not yet. Okay. So shifting over the littlest bit, I feel like we have already seen this image. I think we have Cryptococcus neoformans. These are very large yeast cells. So we're moving to a little bit of fungi. So here you can see the cell wall of the fungus of this yeast. And then the big halo around them are the capsules, the sugar coating that they secrete to the outside. And it is a virulence factor. It enhances the capacity for these guys to get in and go undetected by our immune response. I kind of feel saddened that that's all you get for images of fungi that cause problems, because there are a boatload of them that are really kind of a little bit disturbing to me. But maybe that's for the best. And I'm going to leave it right on this because this table seems like it shows up just fine. So aspergillosis, the fungus Aspergillus fumigatus, these guys we've mentioned before, like the black mold, the sick building syndrome sort of an idea. So there's issues with pulmonary involvement with these guys, but there's also the possibility of brain involvement. So meningitis and abscess is a possibility, and it's a result of that fungus disseminating from the lungs up into the, through the circulation up into the central nervous system. So lots of the treatment is the same. Amphotericin B is a gold standard when we think about antifungal therapy, and there's some other azole drugs that are also possibilities. Candida albicans, candidiasis, we've talked about this guy as well, thinking about vaginal infections or thrush, but it also has the possibility for causing meningitis, and it would be something that also we would think of disseminating. So moving from the oropharynx or urogenital tract through the circulatory system, making its way up. Coccidioidomycosis, the valley fever. We also mentioned this guy with respiratory issues. I think we also talked about him, and histoplasma with skin infection as well, because you can see the through dissemination the abscesses that can form. So coccidioides is rare for nervous system involvement. Only about 1% of these infections will result in meningitis, but when it does, really any of these guys, when we see meningitis result from any of these fungal culprits, it's super bad news, right? Treatment is difficult, and trying to get these drugs in and crossing the blood-brain barrier is a problem for sure, right? So it's, we can, but it's, you're not leaving the hospital. I'm pretty stinking sure you think your end of days is very near. Cryptococcosis, Cryptococcus neoformans, also another one, thinking pulmonary sorts of infections, but it can cause meningitis, granulomas in the brain as we try to wall them off, and that was this guy. Histoplasmosis, like the coccidioidomycosis, another dimorphic fungus, and one that has the potential for meningitis. It's more pulmonary and skin infection. And lastly, for our fungi, the Muromycosis rhizopus, a common bread mold, has the potential for brain abscess, and it would be through the nasopharynx, inhalation of the spore, and then making its way up in there. So another terrifying fungus. You'll never look at a loaf of bread the same. Okay, shifting over to some of the parasites, and there's some good stuff here. This first one, Naegleria fowleri, is a really pretty impressive parasite. It's something that we say here a free-living amoeba. It's not, I call them a parasite, but it's kind of an accidental situation. This organism doesn't need to get into a host to complete its life cycle. And really, when we think about a parasite, it needs to live inside of something in order for that to happen. So this is an accidental parasite, all right? It's something that for us, wrong place at the right time, maybe, for Naglaria, all right? So it's really pretty cool. It likes hot water, so thermal hot pools are where it would prefer to be. An ice cold lake, you're not going to find these guys, all right? Uh, so they exist as amoeba, moving around pseudopods through their environment, feeding on stuff like bacteria, all fine and good, all right? Maybe the nutrients in that environment start to get a little depleted. So this amoeba can convert into a flagellated form, and its little flagella allow it to swim a little faster, maybe moving to a food supply a little bit better, right? So that's kind of crazy, right? Converting from an amoeba to a flagellated form. And then it also has the capability that maybe stuff is just flat out non-existent. There's not enough stuff here to begin with. So it'll form a cyst and it will rest until the conditions become favorable, and then it will go back to this amoeboid stage and start feeding, right? That's what it's doing out in the environment, all right? You happen to get into this water, not just your body, but it's got to be your head. The organism's got to go up your nose. Drinking it isn't going to make you sick. It's got to go up your nose, all right? So jumping into the water, diving in, letting the water go up your nose, not plugging it, all sets the stage for issues, right? Most of us, when we were little, got water up our nose, and we know that hurts. It burns. It makes your eyes water a bit. And the more you get up there, the more you know you don't want that happening, right? So this is really more of a concern for little kids because they're the ones that are still figuring out that crap hurts, right? So they're more likely to have that happen. So little kid to kind of young adult, because at that point, you know, you're kind of invincible and you don't really care and you'll just dive right in because it's awesome, right? Maybe not so much, right? So the little guy gets up your nose, travels up along the nerves up into the brain, and now all of the sudden, instead of the little bits of nutrients in this hot pool, you just took them to the buffet. There's all sorts of good stuff, and they start feeding on your brain. And basically, 3 or 4 days after the water went up your nose, they're doing an autopsy trying to figure out how you died. And that is awesome, all right? Not awesome that you died, but I find stuff that is so crazy, so quick to kill, just fascinating. That you know, it's impressive. There have only been a handful, maybe at this point I could say 2 handfuls of people that have been infected that have actually survived, been cured, right? Almost everybody that gets infected dies, right? It's not something that's super common, right? But I will tell you, not, you know, Lava Hot Springs or Heisey Hot Springs if you're up in Idaho Falls tuning in. It's not these hot pools, but backcountry hot pools here in Idaho definitely have instances where this organism is present. You can see sometimes some signage posted around these hot pools that tell you to go ahead and get in, but to keep your head above the water, right? Swim at your own risk. Please keep your head above because the risk is definitely there, right? Crazy. So it causes a disease called PAM, which stands for primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. And the meningoencephalitis is, like I said, very acute. You start off with, you know, kind of a headache, you feel a little bit bad, and, you know, over the course of just a couple of days, that's the end. So really crazy. This isn't the same, but it's pretty close. This is brain tissue from, instead of the primary amoebic, this is a granulomatous amoebic encephalitis. Different pathogen. Balmuthia, this is also one that's more of a kind of an opportunistic parasite, something that if you've got a competent immune system, it probably does nothing to you at all. But if you're compromised, the likelihood of it getting in and causing serious, likely fatal infection is tremendous. So obviously this person died. So the granulomatous reaction is where we go with our own response. It's not something that happens in just a matter of days that it kills you. It's prolonged. And so we try to wall off. The Balmuthia is also another amoeba. We try to wall it off with this granulomatous reaction, and it causes massive lesions and destruction of this neural tissue, as you can see in these images. Oh man, so many awesome parasites. This next one, Trypanosoma brucei, really there's a handful of different subspecies of Trypanosoma brucei. The three subspecies that we think about, if you looked at them under the microscope, you wouldn't know who you were looking at. They're all morphologically the same. But who they infect and the course of infection that you may manifest is varied, all right? So these guys cause in people a disease that we call African sleeping sickness. And really, it's one of those subspecies because the other one is, it's kind of like the Naegleria. It gets you and is a very quick infection. So you die before you ever exhibit any of the central nervous system, any of the sleeping sickness sorts of disorders. Doesn't matter, all right? These little trypanosomes, we call them hemoflagellates because they live with all of the, well, within our blood, within the fluid that all of the cells are suspended in, all right? And we talked leishmania before. Those guys get into cells. These guys don't, all right? They stay just swimming around. And as I look at these little trypanosomes, they look kind of ribbon-like, often, although this isn't the best image, but often nice purple colors. I just think they look awesome. Not something that if it was my blood smear, I would be terrified. But seeing them like that, I'm like, oh man, aren't those beautiful? And that's, the crazy microbiologist in me. We talked about toxoplasma before, your little friendly cat with the potential to transmit this to you. And issues here, as we mentioned before, with toxoplasma, with GI tract, because that's how we're getting infected. There are possibilities for the cysts to get up into the brain and cause issues. So this is in a mouse, but it could be in us as well, right? Causing problems, right? And there are definitely, I didn't mention this, I don't think, before when we were talking toxoplasma, but there's definitely some thoughts where these likely cysts occurring in the brain cause behavioral shifts, cause problems in that intermediate host. So in this little mouse, now all of a sudden there's problems in its brain, and lots of parasites will try to do things to intermediate hosts to kind of ensure that they get transmitted to the next host. So with the rodents, we see all of the sudden fearlessness. We see these rodents, the little mouse that should be afraid of the cat isn't. It actually it's been described as being attracted to the cat. It's in love with the cat. And really, it's like the odor of urine. It thinks it smells great. And so the little mouse wants to be right by the litter box. So when his friend comes down to use the bathroom, maybe they could hang out, right? And the cat comes down and is like, what in the heck? There's a mouse right here. I will eat you. And it does, right? Unless it's Tom and Jerry, right? And I'm pretty stinking sure Jerry must have been infected with toxoplasma, because why would he torment Tom like that, right? It makes perfect sense, right? So mice or other rodents can have weird things happening. People might have weird things happening too, right? As this could be occurring. There is speculation that maybe schizophrenia could be potentially linked to toxoplasmosis. There are other thoughts. If you've got some thrill-seeking sorts of, you're an adrenaline junkie, you want to, bungee jump or cliff dive or whatever, maybe there's some of this stuff going on, right? Uh, it's hard to say, right? I also read something that said, oh, if you like spicy food, maybe that fits too. You're a thrill seeker. I'm like, I like hot stuff. I don't think I want to jump off of a cliff or bungee jump or anything like that. So I think I'm okay, right? I don't know. Maybe not. Okay, so this is a section, a brain scan with neurocysticercosis. This is cysticerci are the cysts of pork worm, Taenia solium, the pork tapeworm. And the cysticerci are the cyst stage that would be the consumption of egg. So this would be poor hygiene or something like this. We would get infected by consuming improperly or poorly cooked pork, consuming that cyst, getting the adult stage of the worm in the intestines, and then shedding eggs, and those eggs being consumed. So not only do we serve as a definitive host harboring the adult worm, we also could serve as an intermediary host harboring the larval stages, and likely a dead end in that circumstance. All right. Lastly, this table, you can't see it, and we are out of time, I can tell. But everything that I've hit, they fortunately were all in those images. So I will leave you with that. Last lecture, we will spend time Wednesday going over the study guide that I posted. And if you've got any questions or concerns, you can let me know. How many questions are on the final? I don't remember the exact number. 75, I want to say, are probably how many's on there. Somewhere in the 70s, I'm pretty sure, was where I left off. I want to say it was 75. Is there a study guide for the final yet? Heck yes, there's a study guide. It should be posted on Moodle. Let me check that real quick. Maybe. What are you gonna do here? Nothing. Okay. There's too many. I've got too many things here, and I don't know which screen I was sharing with you. Exam 4 study guide is under the week of April 19th to the 25th. It's at the bottom of this week's stuff. That's where it's at. And the final exam is on Moodle, and it's on there under May 3rd to May 9th, just so you know. But it should be opening on the week before that. Next week is what I've got with that. So check Moodle. All that stuff's posted on Moodle. Okay. And now, hopefully there's no other questions, because I've lost all my stuff. I think I closed that. Okay. Farewell. If you have other questions on there, I apologize, because I don't know what I've done. Oh, I brought it back. Okay. Okay.